It's the week ending, Friday the 7th of March, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the US pausing intelligence sharing with Ukraine, following an explosive confrontation in the Oval Office, JD Vance rowing back after insulting British troops in an interview with Fox News, and Inora winning Best Picture at the Academy Awards. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team, it's Rebekah Evans. We welcome back BBC Sport journalist Emma Smith, and we just can't keep her away. It's journalist and campaigner Elizabeth Carr-Ellis. Also this week, guys, Glastonbury have announced their headliners. It's going to be Olivia Rodrigo, Charlie XCX, and the 1975. If you were an honorary Evis for the day, Rebekah, who would you pick as your Glastonbury headliner for 2025?
She's done it before, but it has to be Beyoncé.
Has to be. Wow, you're killing the conversation stone dead. Emma, do you disagree?
Good choice. I'd probably throw in Lady Gaga into there as well. Also, if you could add in to that lineup, they've got like Chapel Row, and you've basically got the modern day perfect sort of queer lineup, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
I actually would be interested in tickets if those were the three headliners. Elizabeth, for you?
Oh, I'm old school. I would go back to Depeche Mode or Barry Manilow.
Oh, pause the podcast right here. I could do a half-hour chat with you just about how the Barry Manilow gig last year was the best thing I've ever seen anywhere. Manilow for the legend slot, please. Okay, Rebekah, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
In a world full of noise, a quiet revolution is offering a soothing solution.
That is an insane level of dirt on your face. Do you mind if I just try and get that off? Okay, hold still, hold still. Can you look up for me so I can get under your eyes?
Horrendous. Kerry ASMR, a TikToker performing some intense mouth sounds on Monday. Rebekah, why did you make me listen to that?
Well, if you've ever found the world overwhelming or overstimulating, this kind of sensory online content might just help you. In fact, there's a new landmark report that's been released this week that shows more young people are turning to content like this, known as ASMR, to combat a struggle with real-life interaction. So whether it's listening to spit painting like that, hair braiding, or playing with slime, these soothing sounds might just be a replacement for face-to-face connection.
And that's the new bit, isn't it? Because ASMR has been around for, I don't know, a decade or so, hasn't it, as a kind of burgeoning trend. But I've not seen this link before where they say the reason people are looking into it is because, well, frankly, they find the real world harder to deal with than they used to.
Well, yeah, exactly. ASMR has been kind of a concept for about 15 years now. It's short for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. Try saying that 3 times fast.
Whisper it, and you've got yourself an online hit.
Exactly. It's a sensory phenomenon that it essentially aims to calm, nurture, or soothe people by inducing this kind of tingling feeling or sensation that certain subsections of the population get when listening to interesting sounds. But this specific study has essentially found a close correlation between age and sensitivity to both social and sensory stimuli. So it's essentially saying that younger people are more likely to find the world overstimulating and want to shield themselves from external noise. But this type of noise, this ASMR, is what is particularly interesting.
Are you an ASMR consumer, Emma? I'm asking you because you introduced me to the work of Lo-Fi Girl, and I just wondered if, you know, someone who seeks solace in study might also enjoy the noise of someone licking a phone.
Yes, Olly, I'm glad that that's the most impact I've had through this podcast in the last, because that was about 3 years ago.
You've said things about sport as well, but
yes,
but in one ear out the other.
Yeah, no one cares about that. It's interesting that ASMR is becoming more popular because, I mean, personally, I'm not a fan. The clip that Rebekah brought us at the start of this discussion, I had to take my earphones out rather than listen to it. But it's interesting how the ASMR is becoming, I guess, sort of more mainstream, more sort of ingrained into people's lives, really, because, I mean, I think it reflects sort of changing viewing habits that people have. More likely to be watching things on YouTube and streaming YouTube and stuff like that, rather than like TV. And obviously online, ASMR is a lot more common. It gets referred to on YouTube by content creators. It's sort of a much more sort of regular, well-known thing, and there's greater chance of people sort of stumbling across it while browsing through things like YouTube. And so it's perhaps unsurprising that now, about sort of 10 years on from ASMR becoming a thing, that it's now part of a lot of people's everyday lives.
Yeah, I suppose it's a comfort blanket for people, Elizabeth, as well as entertainment.
It is, yes, but I find it quite fascinating that everybody thinks it's a new thing. I mean, throughout time immemorial, people have sat by fires and been comforted by the sound of the wood crackling, for example, or gone down to the sea.
Come on, Elizabeth, you're not that old. You had TV.
my cave days are long behind me, I'm happy to say. But we've gone down to the sea and picked up shells and listened to the sound of the sea when we go home and what have you. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a new phenomenon. I think it's just how it's been commercialised and hyped is a new phenomenon. But it is. I mean, today's world is getting more challenging. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I remember during lockdown just suddenly being overwhelmed by how many birds we could hear because there wasn't the sound of the traffic anymore. We have this background noise all the time. So I can quite understand why people are escaping to quieter, more soothing sounds. Although I have to say, that clip, Rebecca, was one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my life.
That's interesting. So is it all four of us that don't like it then? Because, Rebecca, you don't like ASMR either, do you?
I can't stand it, and I think people that hate ASMR are actually there's a disorder called misophonia, and that is related to decreased tolerance to specific sounds. So I have it particularly when it relates to loud chewing, loud crunching, lip smacking noises. It actually induces rage within me.
But isn't that just body horror? Because that's kind of what I'm feeling. It's not that in context I don't mind those. If I'm opening a big tub of something delicious, I like the sound of it. It's other people doing it. I'm like, take your gooey stuff away from my ears that I don't like.
It's more like an extreme version of so obviously we all have slight aversions to things, but people with misophonia particularly have an intense aversion to these things, so they'll have to step away from the table or put earphones on or something like that. I think in that sense I think I have a mild form of it because it kind of grosses me out, makes me uncomfortable, but I will hanker down and cope with it. But some people, for them it's extreme, it's debilitating, it affects their day-to-day lives. I can liken all of these sounds to like nails down the blackboard sort of thing.
Well, there's some research as well, isn't there, or at least some thought that sensitivity to sound is an online phenomenon too. I mean, despite what Elizabeth's saying, that we've always enjoyed sitting around a fire, the fact we can choose our soundtracks all the time and the fact that so many people are using noise-cancelling headphones might mean that we're more sensitive to sound and our filtering of sound than we used to be.
Yes, there's definitely experts are suggesting that there may be some kind of auditory issues that people are having in the modern world. I think it's interesting within this study that 39% of those aged 18 to 24 said that they felt the need to shut out noise in public with the kind of noise-cancelling earphones as an example, and that's compared with only 21% of those aged 45 to 54. So there's definitely been, or there's seemingly from this study been, a cultural shift where perhaps we're all more used to the idea of noise cancelling headphones because they are a possibility now for younger people as compared to previous generations where that wasn't a possibility. So yes, overstimulation, but also potentially just cultural shifts in how we move about the world, really.
I mean, is that a concern to you, Elizabeth, when you think about a generation of people coming through that sort of need to filter the world as they enter out into it? Not the world of crackling fires, but the world of, a crowded train station.
It is, yes. It's very... I find the idea that you would just sit in a room and watch a screen with some noise on it rather than go outside and, as I said, listen to the sea or listen to nature or something like that. It's very, very scary. You are closing down what you can tolerate. I mean, the big thing when you have a phobia, for example, is to get out there and actually touch the thing or find the thing that does. And if you're sitting in your house and closing yourself down, then you are turning off any possibility that you might then be able to cope better with the world. There was a really interesting study I found as well from 2020 that says that for younger people, for their physical health, it's quantity of social interactions they have that matter. They need to be with people more because they have fewer physical symptoms of any illness or, just any sort of physical pains they might have. For older people like me, it's the quality. I mean, obviously it's quality when it comes to people like me, but younger people, and so if they're not having that exposure, then they are doing themselves physical and also mental harm as well.
Except it's still quite difficult though, isn't it, to say, if you were to see someone, a young person, as you say, walking around with on-ear headphones, not to listen to music, but to filter out the world, it's difficult to say to that person, take those off and expose yourself. Stop shielding yourself away. Because actually, they found a thing that works for them that enables them to walk through a busy train station and not feel anxious. I mean, when you're actually, you're taking the thing that is the balm and saying, stop using it. It's quite a difficult prescription.
But it's actually been shown that, cutting yourself off is not helping you. If anything is doing the worst, it's been found that people who spend more time online or in virtual worlds are, twice as likely to develop a mental health condition, for example, like depression or anxiety. They're much more likely to feel socially isolated. And so that just builds it up. It then becomes a vicious circle where if you feel socially isolated, you cut yourself off because you can't feel you can interact with people. So therefore, you're not building up the skills and you're feeling worse. So you just cut yourself off even more.
But of course, this isn't just about reducing anxiety. Otherwise, it wouldn't be one of the most searched terms on YouTube, which it was extraordinarily, Rebekah, in 2023. ASMR is hugely popular because it gives people pleasure. It's been compared to a brain orgasm.
Yeah, exactly. And in this research, the researchers undertook some very detailed interviews, and those who are consuming this ASMR content actually explained that they get a lot of comfort and pleasure from this these kind of videos. There's a calming effect there. There's escapism, and some even
it's a brain
likened it
tingle, a physical feeling in their head that they report.
Yes, so essentially what the research is questioning is how this tingling effect, how this kind of brain orgasm is actually impacting people in their lives. I think what's interesting with the study is the fact that it's younger people that are looking for this kind of brain tingling sensation. It's meeting a natural wish for comfort and connection that I think is particularly interesting. And even though these experiences are synthetic, it's obviously tackling immediate problems that people have in their lives and providing that kind of pleasurable sensation that perhaps they are not getting from real life experiences.
Yeah, and given that it's so related to tactility and comfort, Emma, as Rebekah was just saying, but I'm trying to find a neutral way to say this, but there isn't one. It is particularly repellent the way that the White House has been using it.
Yes. So there was a video put up on the official White House X page titled ASMR Illegal Alien Deportation Flight. And it's basically a video of people being illegal migrants being deported in shackles with ASMR style sort of like sounds. And it's been accused of, ridiculing, dehumanizing.
Yeah, so this is the official White House X account tweeted a video of, the sound of shackles, the sound of the aircraft firing up, the sound of people being deported as basically propaganda.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting on three counts. First of all, that the official White House account would tweet something quite so repugnant, but then again, maybe we shouldn't be hugely surprised. Second of all, it's interesting how it's clearly sort of like attempting to sort of appeal to sort of younger people through the use of ASMR, and which is obviously something that's more closely associated with a sort of a younger audience.
Yeah, the kind of people that would have heard Trump on Joe Rogan.
Exactly, which is interesting. That's sort of like perhaps a base that's the Trump government sort of like appealing to more, again, with sort of, future elections in mind. And also, it's interesting how it's another case of something that started online as sort of like a niche area, which is becoming more mainstream, and as with all these things, becomes taken over by mainstream outlets and politicians. I mean, you could say the same thing about the way that the term woke is used. That was sort of like an initial sort of used by sort of people online in a positive context, and is now being completely transmogrified into a catch-all insult by conservative people. It's just interesting the way that sort of these things which start off as niche sort of like alternative ideas become more popular, become more mainstream, and get all the way to the White House.
Well, it was sort of a fetish, really, wasn't it, Rebekah, when it started off? And now it's going totally mainstream. Do you see ASMR getting, seems strange to say this, but even bigger?
To a certain extent, yes, I do, because I think there's so much scope within ASMR. There's so many noises within the society that can be made into content. You look at ASMR now, and there's even the most squeamish stuff, like listening to people crack their bones and take out their ingrown toenails and stuff like that. It's just totally bizarre in that sense. But whilst I might not, lean into ASMR content, there are some things that in ASMR that I enjoy, particularly the cutting soap thing. I find that really soothing, and even for someone with misophonia that I as I mentioned earlier, I just think
to be clear. So is this someone, because I hate this stuff, but this is someone filming themselves, are they cutting into bars of soap with a knife?
Yeah, so it's like bars of soap.
You just banged your microphone. A lot of people would have got off on that. Carry on.
bars of soap that have like indentations in them made, and then you slice them, and it slices into tiny little pieces, and they make noises against the microphone.
And do you feel comfortable and satisfied hearing it?
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm wasting my time when I hear it. I'm just like, why am I not listening to someone saying something interesting?
I think it's interesting because I think some people seek out ASMR content, obviously as a safety blanket. If soap cutting ASMR stuff comes across my social media, I will probably listen to it, but anything else, no. I do see ASMR getting bigger because the world is a pretty rubbish place, and therefore the people that are looking for comfort and looking for safety within ASMR is probably likely to grow, as bleak as that sounds.
Right. On the way, the top tier football club taking a stand in the USA. That's after this. Okay, Emma, you're next. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, a football club faced crisis one game into its existence.
Announcers came over the PA system, telling fans that discrimination is not tolerated by the stadium.
If they're going to continue to come to the game and make that chant, it's better that they do not come.
In a press conference after the game, head coach Mikey Varas addressed the chant.
The chant that was heard tonight is unacceptable. It doesn't represent the players, myself, the club, and it certainly doesn't represent San Diego or Baja California.
San Diego football coach Mikey Varas talking to CBS 8 San Diego on Monday. Emma, what was the chant he was referring to?
So, just to say that the chant is a homophobic chant. It uses a homophobic slang term in Spanish, so apologies if there will be some potentially offensive language for Spanish-speaking listeners. The chant is puto, which is a Mexican slang for a male prostitute, and it was being shouted continuously during the first ever MLS, Major League Soccer, league game featuring San Diego FC, who said this week that they will take immediate steps and communicate a detailed plan to deal with this chanting from their own fans after condemning the unacceptable chants during their first ever league game last Saturday.
And so chanted against whom? The team they were playing, presumably?
Chanted against the team they were playing, St. Louis City. It's particularly common when the opposition goalkeeper is preparing to take their kick and everyone shouts puto. And it's particularly prevalent during Mexican matches. The Mexican men's national team have been fined several times by FIFA for this chant. San Diego is near the Mexican border. There's a large Mexican immigrant population in San Diego, and so that means that this chant has been brought over to the US League and was in the spotlight this week.
Okay. So, Elizabeth, you'd understand how big, shiny new football team, soccer's really catching on along that coast of the USA. And as Emma says, you've got some Mexican fans who love Mexican football that are now going to start coming to American soccer. You can understand why the owners of that team and the managers of that team might want to play that down. But is it avoidable?
It's difficult. I found this... I've had to do a little bit of soul searching since Emma suggested this story, because I know when I've been to football games, I've also joined in a few shouts. Never anything racist or homophobic, that would just be abhorrent. But, the odd referee's a tosser, that sort of thing that you do. And you take it and you accept it as part of the game, when actually, now when I think about it, that's a really, really bad way to go. And the fact that you're at a football game should not be an excuse for abusing people, which is what it is, and we take it that way. And I mean, I've done this in Spain too. I even learned the Spanish words for it. Never used puto, I have to say.
Do you really know the Spanish word for tosser? I'd love to hear that in your accent.
Que gilipollas.
Fascinating.
Yep. And so, lo siento, árbitros. All the referees that I have said.
Who needs Duolingo?
I apologise now because it's done it. It's a horrible part of the game, and I have to say it's a horrible part of the men's game, because you do not get as much abuse or shouting in the women's game. It is much more supportive there. It is a much more family friendly atmosphere, which is why there's not so much abuse. And also they don't have as much tribalism. The clubs aren't as new, which is why this story in America is really sad, because people are bringing their old tribalism to a new stadium.
Yeah, I mean, you think about this a lot, Emma, and you write about this. I'm interested in your position on what Elizabeth just said. I presume you would object to this word because it's homophobic. Do you object to all football chants like the referee's a tosser? I mean, where do you stand on that? It's a big release for people. It's part of the fun.
It is. And obviously, tribalism is part of football. But I do think there is an issue when it comes to people feeling like they have the right, because they paid for a ticket to a football match, to therefore be able to say whatever they want and be able to shout things at people that they would never, most people would never think of saying, to someone's face on the street. There was an incident actually this week which could have been the hook for this story as well, which was an FA Cup match between Crystal Palace and Millwall. There was a foul by the Millwall goalkeeper, Liam Roberts, on Jean-Philippe Mateta, the Palace striker.
Oh, yeah, I saw a photo of that.
Yes.
Mashed him on the head with a football boot, didn't he?
Yes, it was a horrendous challenge. Roberts was sent off. The Millwall fans, while Mateta was getting treatment on the pitch, they were chanting, let him die. Now, I'm sure that most of the Millwall fans didn't actually want Mateta to die. But it was all part of the, it's banter, he's an opposition player, he's been smashed about the head by our player, we're going to chant. It's like, first of all, maybe save it until you know that he's not going to die, because he was being treated on the pitch for about 10 minutes and had to go to hospital for 25 stitches. So, but then there's also, it's interesting that Millwall have very much taken a very defensive stance towards their fans, to the extent that they've actually banned the Daily Mail from attending press conferences and matches, because the Mail did a story about the let them die chants, and Millwall felt that this was unfair on their supporters. And I think that there really is a bit of an issue that too many supporters feel that they can say whatever they want and chant whatever they want at football matches, and it's okay because they paid the ticket and they're in the with the rest of the crowd, and I'm sure that a lot of the people who at San Diego who were shouting puto aren't homophobic. They were just joining in with the crowd, and it was just like, a way of having a go at the opposition keeper. But it's an offensive word, and you would not think of shouting it at someone outside of that context. And I don't know why some people think that because it's in the context of football, that makes it acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth actually just underlining as well on the word before I go to Rebekah, because I was reading up on this. I'd never heard the word puto before, but to find a sort of correlating equivalent, It's like, and again, forgive the fact I'm about to use the word, but obviously in context I have to, it's a bit like the word faggot, isn't it? It's a word that actually if you're gay, you may have heard while someone is beating you up. That's why it's offensive to Latin American homosexuals in particular.
Yes, and it's that's the thing. It's like, yes, you can sort of say, oh, it's just, you know, banter, but for some gay people, it really isn't. And it's a similar thing that in England, a lot of fans will chant at Chelsea, the Chelsea Vent Boy chant, because of, you know, the sort of like history of sort of like male prostitutes, sort of like in, you know, in that area of London. And yeah, it's you know, it's all, you know, on one level, for some people it's just banter, but for other people it's deeply homophobic. And where do you draw that line? And would you think that it's acceptable to say that sort of stuff, you know, outside of the context of football, which most people say it wouldn't be?
And is there an argument, Rebekah, sort of as we were discussing in the last story, your story, about how people find release in ASMR? You know, is there a defence in these people find a release by going to the football terraces? Where else is there for them where they can shout and release and engage in what some people frankly think of as toxic masculinity?
Yeah, there's probably an argument or a wider discussion that should probably be had about men and their ability to have particular spaces within society. Obviously, football is a way that brings a lot of men together into a space, and there's bonding and kind of solidarity there. But I definitely agree with the points that Elizabeth and Emma have both made. I think there is a line that needs to be drawn. There definitely needs to be measures that come into place to combat offensive chanting, offensive language used within those spaces. It's just not acceptable. Masculinity is not defined by swear words, it's not defined by abuse, it's not defined by any of these negative things. It's not necessary, and it just makes the game a pretty awful place to be. People are taking their kids to these games. I know it's not necessarily a family friendly environment, and there's an argument to be had there, but at the same time the game should be able to be enjoyed by everyone. And being in the football stands when people are using this kind of language is just it's an uncomfortable experience.
Yeah, and a culture clash, I guess, Emma, for the reasons that Rebekah just said, in the United States, right? Because, you know, baseball is a family game, isn't it? And so is what they call football, American football, and so is basketball. Actually, their traditions are that you take your family to stadiums. They're maybe not used to such hostility like this. Yeah, and to an extent in American soccer as well, fan culture in the MLS is very different to that in the UK. Obviously, in the UK, it's a very working class sport, whereas in the US, there's other much more popular sports. It means that there's sort of like a more of a hipster culture, sort of like an alternative. You know, for example, one of the clubs in the MLS, Portland Timbers, one of their great traditions is after scoring a goal is to cut a piece off a giant log. With a chainsaw, which I think is quite a cool thing, but it wouldn't maybe go down quite so well at Millwall or something like that. US sporting culture, which is very different, and I think it is sort of like a bit of a shock to have something like this in the MLS, where they don't really have this. There is some culture of rivalry, and but there's not so much of a toxic culture, and this idea of toxic fandom. And I think that this homophobic chanting, whether deliberately homophobic or otherwise, it's come as a bit of a shock because there's not really been too many incidents like this in the MLS before. Can I point out that ice hockey is horrendously violent in the US? Yes, that's true. Yeah. It is absolutely disgusting. I cannot watch it. And I think in many ways that is similar to the football here. It's accepted that there's going to be violence. We accept that there is going to be chanting in football games, and that chanting will go too far. It's just accepted and excused as part of the game, and that's what we need to get away from. How, though? I mean, it's one thing to say we don't want it, but what do you do? What gives you teeth? What gives it teeth is taking much more action. These things are criminal offences. But how often does that happen? It doesn't. We need to really boost up the legislation and give the action so that when players do commit these, because they are sometimes criminal acts, they're hate speech, they're criminal acts, there should be stronger action taken. You said players, but you mean fans, right? Fans would be punished for saying it. Yeah. But some people think that the players should be punished in the form of the team. the team should be responsible for its fans and what they say. What do you think about that?
I think in some ways it would. I remember the violence, the football hooliganism in the 80s, the 70s, and I can remember how the teams were punished for that. Liverpool was punished quite a lot for violence, and it did have an impact, definitely.
I think that authorities are getting better at when it's individuals. Like, for example, you'll find quite often with a quick Google examples of individuals who've done racist chanting or homophobic chanting being arrested. The issue comes when it's something like San Diego, where it's a huge crowd of people doing it. You can't just prosecute everyone individually, because that's just unlikely. And I think there's a debate in sport, in football, whether or not if a team's fans are doing abusive chanting, should the team be forced to abandon games, be deducted points. And the argument against is that punishes the players and the clubs who aren't taking part in this abusive chanting. But on the other hand, for example, in the case of San Diego, they're obviously they're doing it because they think they're defending their team, and they think they're standing up for their team and having a go at the opposition. But if it's made okay, by doing this you are harming your team in terms of their ability to accrue points and have success in the season, would that have an impact in stopping these chants? And it's an ongoing debate. I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if a league, if a governing body took that step and said, right, if you use this chant, then your team gets deducted 3 points, and see how much of an impact that would have. Because I think it could have an impact.
And Rebekah, you're a Liverpool fan, as you've discussed on the pod before. What do you think works?
I think what's really important is a mixture of education versus punishment in these scenarios. Obviously, as we've identified, it's really difficult when it's a large group of people, but obviously Liverpool is all too familiar with the idea of tragedy chanting. Obviously the Hillsborough tragedy has sadly been the source of many offensive chants throughout the years, and Liverpool has taken a real hardline stance on these kind of chants, repeatedly issuing strong public statements, even partnering with Manchester United, because they're obviously another club that unfortunately experiences tragedy chanting and offensive language. But what I think is really important is obviously tackling the issue, and as I mentioned, through a mixture of education versus punishment. There was a really interesting interview that I read the other day about a Chelsea fan who actually was charged at a game with a Section 5 public offence order after shouting a homophobic slur. He was banned from attending football matches after pleading guilty in court. But now he's trying to make amends after he went through a fan education programme. He wants to make sure that no one repeats his mistakes. So I think that particular case kind of shines a light on the importance of education and punishment being used in tandem. Now, punishment is obviously important because people need to know the consequences of their actions, but it's a temporary fix, really. So by combining that with education, I think that's fostering more of a long-term cultural shift to help people understand the harm of their actions and promote empathy and awareness, really.
I'm laughing just because I like the idea of an empathy and awareness-based chant, Let's not be homophobic. Let's see if we can get that going. Thank you for that. Up next is Scottish Gaelic, the new Scandinois. That's after this. Okay, Elizabeth, you are finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This is the week when we learn to mind our languages.
So animal fuse goedse.
Ellie, when's the bad? We've been shot.
Jay?
This could you get us jack?
Where were you shot?
Ellie, a girl I got lost.
No, Freddy. Geef me graag machine. Dad, has Sheena de phone?
Dad?
Ahina.
Come on, Mum, Billy okay?
A clip from The Island from BBC iPlayer, although it has another title as well, which I'm going to pronounce as Antilene. Sorry if I got that wrong. I must admit, I wouldn't have recognised the language they were speaking there, Elizabeth. What is it and what's the story?
Well, that language is actually Scottish Gaelic, not Gaelic. Gaelic is Irish.
Okay. You say Gaelic, do you? Okay.
It is Gaelic, yes.
Right.
And I have a Scottish husband who has been nagging at me constantly to get that right. And I will apologise to all our Gaelic listeners. I think it's pronounced Anchilin. from what I can hear.
Right, okay, and Chelan. And
And
that
Chelan.
means the island. Okay, so
And
there
that
we
means
are.
the island.
I suppose that's a good example of why the BBC's put some money into this then, isn't it? We've all learnt a word. What's the story, though? I mean, why are you flagging this drama that's been on the screens?
Well, this drama it's a Gaelic crime thriller set on one of the Scottish islands. And I'm highlighting it because it has been so popular, it has gone international. And this week, the Scottish government has awarded an extra 1.8 million to Gaelic Media Service, which brings it up to 14.8 million to highlight the language and to spread its awareness more. I find it very interesting because the number of Gaelic speakers is only about 1.2% of the population.
Of Scotland?
Of Scotland,
So
yes.
it's tens of thousands, basically.
It's about 67,000 who speak it, but there is another 40,000, 50,000 who say they can understand it. Being a very bad Spanish speaker, I really understand what they mean. There are people who can speak it fluently, but others who have a good understanding of the language. That might not be much, but it has actually gone up. In 2011, the number speaking was only 57,000. So it's gone up about 10 or 12,000 speaking it. I became interested in Gaelic when I worked in Glasgow, and one of my colleagues used to talk it to his mum. He was from the Western Isles, and he used to phone up his mum, and it got it away from being, which I think is how we see a lot of the indigenous languages of Britain. It got away from being this twee little non-language to a living, breathing one. And the reason why I'm so interested in this is because I think we are starting to see our languages developing in that way, and I think that's only going to grow. I mean, the interest in Gaelic, Visit Scotland have had over a 70% increase over the last few years in the number of people looking at Gaelic related content for Scotland. You know, if we look at New Zealand, for example, Maori tourism brings in about 500 million pounds to their economy every year. It's been estimated that Gaelic could bring in up to 148 million, something like that, just by investing in it. We're missing a trick by not looking after our national languages.
Okay, but why did these languages die out in the first place, Emma? Why is it only 1% of Scots that speak Gaelic?
I think that you have to sort of look at the history of the United Kingdom and understand that sort of like a lot of these languages were suppressed to an extent, particularly if you look at like the history of Irish, for example, in the Gaelic languages sort of being suppressed, and English becoming the dominant language. I think that perhaps an interest in sort of this is perhaps because of people rediscovering their roots, maybe sort of like, so I think all languages are political, and it's and part of political heritage, and I think there's an interest in rediscovering these things as part of a discovery of national identity. There's still a long way to go in terms of education, because simply the education sort of structure isn't there. And it was doubly interesting in that study that found that from 2022 found that the Scottish Gaelic Duolingo course had more than 1 million learners. I think that there is definitely an interest in people discovering these historic British languages, but there just isn't necessarily the educational structures currently there in place.
Do you think, though, that interest, Elizabeth, can go beyond the Scottish diaspora and people who are currently in Scotland who access Scottish language services? Is this of interest? Is it interesting to people that aren't Scottish?
Yeah, I think it is. I think any language gives you an insight into the culture of the country. So anybody who's just interested in Scotland or in Britain together would have an interest in it. It's not just Scottish that's going up. I mean, Emma was talking about the number of people learning Gaelic on Duolingo. According to the Cornish Council, 5,000 people are learning Cornish. There is a huge resurgence in our national languages and in how they're going. So
but are they our national languages? I suppose that's what I'm getting at, Rebekah, is some people would think, well, the reason, not that it was the right thing to do, but the reason that British government suppressed these languages over time was because they wanted to create a truly national language across the UK, which was English. That was the purpose of suppressing them. So is it an act of nationalism, for a Scot or for a Welsh person to revive these languages, which is against the interests of the UK being a cohesive cultural place.
I think so. I think this kind of diversity is fostering pluralism, and it really broadens our perspectives. We've got such a rich culture within the UK. I mean, you can travel the length and breadth of the UK and discover that there's so much diversity even within such a small space. And I think the revival of these languages only serves to prove that both to everyone that lives in the UK and abroad. And I think arguably it means that the UK government itself has a moral imperative to restore the languages that it historically sought to suppress. We've talked about policies of anglicisation and suppressing several languages, and it kind of it makes me remember the concept of natal alienation, which is essentially severing ties and estranging a person from their cultural heritage. And I think language plays a huge role in that. I think it's really important to restore these languages, to acknowledge the historical harm that anglicisation caused, and essentially just embrace the diversity, the linguistic diversity within this country. Would we talk about how great Scotland is, how great Wales is, how great Northern Ireland is, and encourage tourism? But just as we're encouraging tourism, we should be encouraging a return to historical languages as well.
But it comes at a cost, Elizabeth, as you're saying. This is an investment. Every pound that they put into this is a pound they're not putting into something else.
But every pound that they put into that has been shown to give you £1.34 back. So it's an investment that's given you a 33% increase on how you invest. And as I said, New Zealand embraces its maritourism no end. That is what people associate with that country. If you look over at Spain, for example, you have all of those different languages. You have Catalan. They're making a big thing out of how Catalonia is Spain, but it's not Spain, because it has its own language, it has its own culture and its heritage, to try and get you to go to Catalonia as well as go to all the other places in Spain. So there is a huge increase. It could do an awful lot for our economy if we start looking after our languages more. And all of the cultural aspects that go with it. Rebecca's all right. There's such a rich cultural heritage that goes with that too. And yeah, we should embrace it.
There's also another thing going on, another cultural movement, if you like, Emma, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier with ASMR and people watching YouTube rather than telly, which is one of the reasons there's been a big mainstream audience for this drama in Scottish Gaelic, is because people are used to watching more things with subtitles now. Absolutely.
So there's much less of the 1-inch barrier, I guess you could call them, sort of like the subtitles that used to be sort of such a turn off for people. People are much more likely to watch, shows with subtitles, things like Squid Game, Shogun, much more popular. And I also think, it's part of, multicultural sort of Britain nowadays, is that people are becoming more and more used to people speaking in different languages, and so there's a much more sort of a willingness and an interest in sort of the languages, the different languages to English that we have sort of within the UK. And I think even if it's not necessarily learning Gaelic, Welsh, whatever, to speak it as a first language, there's an interest in rediscovering it for people to be in touch with their own cultures.
But then I suppose from that point of view, Rebecca, what we're talking about in terms of investment doesn't need to just come from the government, does it? If there's money in it, then will we see the private sector invest more in media in our national languages?
Yeah, I think having a variety of approaches to funding and supporting media in these languages is obviously very important. And as you identify, I think through a mix of public funding, as cultural grants, as well as perhaps dedicated broadcasting authorities, that could be a very successful model. And it's not new. Not too far away, Ireland's TG4 is the nation's dedicated Irish language TV channel. And even as Elizabeth mentioned, the New Zealand's Maori Broadcasting Agency is funded and has specific grants for youth-focused and educational content. And as we've touched upon, with so many people trying to learn the language, I think targeting this towards younger audiences, many of whom are arguably more likely to be receptive to language learning, can only be a positive thing. So having a diversity of funding, as well as taking kind of newer approaches towards digital first content, is probably a successful funding model that Scotland could look towards. as it's seen success elsewhere across the globe.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just want to finish by saying the colleague that I heard speaking Gaelic to his mum actually took his MP's oath of office in Gaelic in Parliament, and that just felt like it was so uniting for the country to be able to hear a different language, a British language, a Scottish language, one of our island's languages being celebrated in Westminster that way. As I said, I'm all for giving our languages. Forget Rupert Lowe. This might be England. We speak a lot of different languages here.
Well, on that note, I would like to say goodbye and thanks for listening in Scottish Gaelic, but I can't.
Quick to Google Translate.
I'm sure you'll survive. Shout out to our listeners in the Outer Hebrides, though. My thanks to Rebecca, Emma and Elizabeth. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped. Wherever you get your podcast, remember to tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.